He signed the papers without looking up. She didn't cry. She simply smiled, the way people smile right before the ground opens. He thought he was ending a marriage. He didn't know he was about to lose an empire. And somewhere in Seoul, a phone was already ringing, with her real name on it. Rain fell over Gangnam the night Thandiwi first saw Do-yeon, though at the time she didn't know his name, only the way the room seemed to bend around him, the way men in dark suits lowered their eyes when he passed. She had come to Seoul under a name that wasn't fully hers, working a junior post at a logistics firm, watching cargo numbers that, unknown to her colleagues, moved through ports her own family quietly owned an ocean away. Some people hide from danger. The narrator's voice seems to murmur over the scene. Others hide from being seen at all. Do-yeon noticed her not because she was loud, but because she wasn't afraid of him, and men like him were rarely offered honesty. Their marriage, when it came months later, was arranged by his father for reasons Do-yeon never fully understood. Some old debt, some old alliance. He assumed she was poor. She let him believe it. It was, she told herself, the only way to know if a man could love a woman with nothing to offer him. She was wrong about how long that lie could survive. What Thandiwe didn't yet know was that Do-yeon had already met someone else, a woman named Sarah, who smiled at him the way ambition smiles at opportunity. And what Do-yeon didn't know was that the quiet woman in his home held more power in her signature than his entire family's fortune. There was one night, just one, when Do-yeon forgot to be cold. It happened after a business dinner turned violent, after he came home with blood on his knuckles and something fractured behind his eyes. Thandiwe didn't ask questions. She simply cleaned the wound, and in the silence between them, something shifted. Men like him don't forgive easily, the narrator observes quietly. But that night, he didn't need forgiveness. He needed to be seen. For a few hours, there was no syndicate, no arranged marriage, no distance. Only two people who had spent years pretending not to need anyone. But morning came, and with it, his guilt. Do-yeon couldn't reconcile the man who needed her with the man his father had built him to be. He pulled away harder than he had ever pulled anyone close. Within the week, he was seen at a private club with Sarah on his arm, and Thandiwe, watching from across the room in silence, said nothing at all. She would carry the truth of that night alone, a truth that would soon change everything, arriving quietly, the way most life-altering things do. The same week Thandiwe learned she was pregnant, Do-yeon placed divorce papers on the kitchen table like they were nothing more than a grocery list. "It's better this way," he said, not meeting her eyes. "You'll be provided for." "Some decisions don't destroy you immediately," the narrator whispers. "They wait, they watch. And when they finally strike, they take everything with them." Thandiwe said nothing. She signed where he asked her to sign, packed one suitcase, and by the following morning, boarded a flight back to Harare, carrying a secret Do-yeon would not learn of for years. She didn't leave in defeat. She left to become who she had always been, no longer hiding, no longer small. The Nkomo Empire had a chairwoman waiting to reclaim her seat, and a fatherless child growing beneath a heart Do-yeon had broken without ever knowing its true weight. Somewhere in Seoul, Do-yeon would soon discover that the woman he called poor controlled the very ports his syndicate depended on to survive, and that the child she carried would one day sit across from him at a table where he no longer held the power. Harare welcomed Thandiwe back, not as the quiet woman who had left, but as something the city itself seemed to sense before it was ever announced. A shift in the air, the way animals go still before a storm arrives. She gave birth in the rainy season, in a private wing of a hospital her own family had built decades earlier, surrounded by nurses who had no idea the woman in the bed was the granddaughter of the man whose name was carved above the entrance. She named her son Tapiwa, a word that meant, "We have been given a gift," and she held him through the first night without a single tear, though the narrator's voice, if one listened closely, seemed to linger there in the dark. "Grief has a strange patience," it murmured. It does not demand to be felt all at once. It waits in corners, in quiet rooms, in the space between a mother's heartbeat and her child's first cry. She did not call Do-Yun. She did not send a letter, a message, a single word across the ocean that separated Seoul from Harare. What would she have said? That the man who signed her away like an inconvenience had a son who shared his exact stubborn jaw, his same unreadable eyes? She decided, in the raw exhaustion of new motherhood, that some truths were not gifts to give to men who had already thrown away the person offering them. Instead, she turned toward the only inheritance that had never abandoned her: the Nkomo name. Her grandfather, the aging patriarch of the family's business empire, had watched from a distance for years as Thandiwe disappeared into an arranged marriage overseas, never once demanding she return, never once revealing to Do-Yun's family who she truly was. It had been her choice, her secrecy, her quiet rebellion against a life handed to her before she could speak. But when she came home with a child in her arms and steel behind her eyes, the old man recognized something he had been waiting for. "You are ready now," he told her. The weak Tapiwa turned 3 months old. "Ready to stop hiding what you were born to carry." She did not answer right away. She simply looked down at her son, sleeping against her chest, and thought of a night in Seoul when a dangerous man had let himself be vulnerable for a few hours, only to bury that vulnerability the moment the sun rose. Some women rebuild themselves in silence, the narrator says softly over the passage of months that follow. Not because they are hiding, but because they are gathering the pieces no one thought to ask for. Over the next 4 years, Thandiwe transformed from a shadow into a name spoken with caution in boardrooms across 3 continents. She took her seat at the head of Nkomo Holdings not with fanfare, but with a precision that unsettled men twice her age. She restructured the shipping divisions that fed silently into Southeast Asian markets. She renegotiated banking partnerships that quietly touched syndicates in Seoul, syndicates that had no idea whose hand now guided the numbers on their ledgers. She raised Tapiwa in a house full of warmth she had never received in Seoul, teaching him Shona lullabies at night and watching, with a private ache she rarely allowed herself, as his features grew sharper, more familiar, more like a man she had once loved and then learned to survive without. He asked about his father only once, at 5 years old, standing in the doorway of her office with a curiosity too old for his face. "Where is he?" Thandiwe knelt down, brushing a hand over his hair. "He doesn't know about you yet, my love. But one day, he will." Children ask simple questions, the narrator reflects, but the answers their mothers carry are rarely simple at all. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Do-Yun's world had not softened with time. It had hardened into something colder. His engagement to Sarah had dragged on for years without resolution, delayed first by his father's disapproval, then by whispers within the syndicate that Sarah's ambitions reached further than her loyalty. Chairman Han, aging and increasingly paranoid, grew suspicious of the woman his son had chosen, though he could never quite articulate why. Do-Yun himself had changed in ways he refused to examine. He drank more. He slept less. He found himself, on nights he would never admit to anyone, standing in the doorway of the room that had once been Thandiwee's, staring at nothing, searching for a feeling he could not name. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself the quiet woman he had discarded meant nothing more than an obligation fulfilled and released. But some absences do not fade with time, the narrator says. Quieter now. Some absences grow louder the longer they are ignored. It was Chairman Han himself who first noticed the name, buried in a financial report from an offshore holding company, a name attached to a controlling interest in 3 of their most vital shipping routes. Nkomo Holdings. He dismissed it at first as coincidence, a common enough surname on the African continent. But something about it nagged at him in the weeks that followed. An itch he couldn't quite scratch. A memory he couldn't quite place. He did not yet know that the name belonged to the daughter-in-law he had dismissed as poor, as beneath his son, as a debt paid and forgotten. He did not yet know how badly he had underestimated her. In Harare, Thandiwe received word of an approaching business gala in Seoul, a lavish affair meant to formalize new partnerships between Korean conglomerates and African trade interests, hosted, ironically, by the very syndicate she had once called family by marriage. Her advisors urged her to attend personally, to finally step into the room as who she truly was, rather than negotiating from behind layers of representatives and shell companies. She stood at her office window that evening, looking out over a city that had rebuilt her long before it rebuilt itself, and made a decision she had delayed for 4 years. Some women wait for the right moment to reveal themselves, the narrator says, and some moments simply refuse to wait any longer. Book the flight, she told her assistant. And prepare Tapiwa's things as well. It's time his father learned the truth. On my terms, not his. Across the ocean, Do-yeon stood beside Sarah at a press event announcing their long-delayed engagement, unaware that the woman he once called nothing was boarding a plane that would land in Seoul within days, and that the son sitting quietly beside her held a face Do-yeon would recognize the instant he saw it. The grand hall of the Han family's flagship hotel glittered under chandeliers that had cost more than most families would earn in a lifetime, and into that glittering room walked a man who believed he had already won everything he wanted. Do-yoon stood at the center of the room in a black tuxedo. Sarah beside him in a gown of deep crimson, her smile practiced, her grip on his arm just slightly too tight, as though she sensed, even now, that something about tonight refused to sit right in her chest. The occasion was meant to be a formal celebration, the finalization of their engagement, a merger of families the syndicate had orchestrated for months, and, quietly, the official announcement of a new international trade partnership with an African holding company that had recently acquired stakes in 3 of the syndicate's most essential shipping lines. Power gathers in rooms like this, the narrator murmurs as guests filter in, champagne glasses catching the light. But so does reckoning, and rarely do the two announce themselves before they arrive. Chairman Han, seated at the head table, still could not shake the unease that had settled into his chest weeks earlier. The name on the shipping contracts, Encomo Holdings, continued to surface in every direction he turned, and tonight, for the first time, he would finally meet the mysterious chairwoman behind it, flown in personally to finalize the partnership. He had no idea who was walking through the doors. The room did not go silent all at once. It happened in pieces, the way a wave gathers before it breaks. First, the guests near the entrance, murmuring, turning. Then the ripples spreading toward the center of the hall, voices dropping, eyes widening, until finally, Do-yoon himself turned to see what had captured the room's attention so completely. Thandiwe stood in the doorway in a deep emerald gown, her posture unshaken, her expression calm in a way that unsettled everyone who had expected softness. Beside her, holding her hand, stood a boy no older than 4, his sharp eyes and unmistakable jawline drawing gasps from anyone who had ever spent time in Do-yeon's presence. Some entrances do not need announcements, the narrator says quietly. The silence itself does the speaking. Do-yoon's champagne glass slipped slightly in his hand. For a moment, he could not process what he was seeing. The woman he had discarded 4 years earlier standing before him not as a forgotten wife, but as the very chairwoman his family had spent weeks courting, flanked by a child who bore his own face staring back at him. Thandiwe, he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. She did not rush toward him. She did not falter. She simply walked forward, her heels striking the marble floor with unhurried precision, until she stood before the head table where Chairman Han sat frozen in his seat. "Chairman Han," she said, her voice steady, formal, betraying nothing of the years behind it. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person. I believe you've been eager to meet the head of Encomo Holdings." The room seemed to hold its breath collectively. "You," Chairman Han said slowly, disbelief cracking through his usual composure, "are Encomo?" "I am," Thandiwe answered. "And this," she added, resting a hand gently on the boy's shoulder, "is Tapiwa, your grandson. Some truths do not arrive quietly," the narrator says. "Some truths arrive precisely when the room is most unprepared to survive them." Sarah's practiced smile faltered for the first time all evening, her grip on Do-Yun's arm loosening as she looked between the boy's face and Do-Yun's, the resemblance undeniable even to a stranger. "This is impossible," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. "It's very possible," Thandiwe replied evenly, not even glancing her way. 4 years possible, to be exact. Do-Yun stepped forward, his composure cracking in a way none of his associates had ever witnessed. "Thandiwe, why didn't you tell me? Why did you disappear without a word?" "Because you signed papers ending our marriage before I had the chance," she said, her voice calm but edged with years of restrained pain. "You called me a burden you were finally free of. I decided you didn't deserve to know what you were losing until you'd already lost it completely." "Some silences are not cruelty," the narrator observed softly. "Sometimes silence is simply the only dignity left to protect." Chairman Han rose slowly from his seat, his eyes moving between Thandiwe, the boy, and his son, calculations shifting rapidly behind his gaze. Not merely of family, but of the staggering business implications now unfolding before the entire gathered elite of Seoul's underworld and its corporate allies. "The partnership," he said carefully, "the shipping routes, are entirely under my control," Thandiwe finished for him. "Which means, Chairman, that the future of tonight's business arrangement now depends significantly on how this family chooses to treat mine." The threat, delivered so gently it barely registered as one, landed with the weight of a blade nonetheless. Do-Yun took another step closer, ignoring Sarah entirely now, his eyes fixed on his son's face as though searching for confirmation his mind still refused to accept. "Tapiwa," he said quietly, testing the name. The boy looked up at him with open, unguarded curiosity, too young to understand the storm surrounding him, too young to carry any of the resentment his mother had spent years protecting him from. "He's beautiful," Do-Yun said, his voice breaking slightly. "He is," Thandiwe agreed. "And he has grown up without needing you. Don't mistake tonight as an invitation to change that. Some reunions do not offer forgiveness," the narrator says. "Some simply offer the truth and leave the rest to be earned." Sarah, sensing the ground shifting beneath her rapidly, attempted to reclaim the moment. "Do-Yun, darling, this doesn't change anything between us, doesn't it?" Chairman Han interrupted sharply, his gaze cold as he studied her. "A grandson I never knew existed, hidden by a woman my family dismissed as insignificant, who now controls contracts worth more than this entire gala. I think, Sarah, tonight has changed considerably more than you realize." The engagement announcement, so carefully planned for that evening, dissolved into chaos before a single toast could be raised. As the room buzzed with whispered scandal and shifting alliances, Do-Yun pulled Thandiwe aside, his voice low and desperate. "Give me a chance to fix this," he said. "Please." But Thandiwe only looked at him with eyes that had learned, over 4 long years, exactly how much his promises were worth. The gala ended not with champagne toasts, but with a quiet exodus of guests too stunned to remain, murmuring theories and half-truths into the Seoul night as they filtered toward waiting cars. Do-Yun found Thandiwe an hour later on the hotel's private terrace, Tapiwa finally asleep in the arms of her assistant inside, the city skyline glittering coldly beyond the glass railing where she stood alone. "You could have told me," he said, approaching slowly, careful not to close the distance too quickly. "You could have asked," she replied without turning. "You could have looked at me even once during our marriage as though I mattered beyond convenience. You didn't." "Regret arrives late for men who mistake control for love," the narrator says quietly. "And by the time it arrives, it rarely finds the door still open." Do-Yun exhaled, running a hand through his hair, the composure he'd built over years of syndicate leadership crumbling in fragments before her. "I was raised to believe emotion was weakness. My father drilled that into me since I was a child. I didn't know how to hold what I felt for you without feeling like I was losing myself. So instead, you lost me, Thandiwe said, finally turning to face him. And you lost 4 years of your son's life. That's not a philosophy, Do-yun. That's a choice. And choices have consequences, even for men who believe themselves untouchable. He flinched at that, the truth of it settling somewhere he couldn't ignore. What do you want from me? Tell me, and I'll do it. I don't want anything from you, she said simply. That's the part you still don't understand. I built an empire without your name attached to it. I raised our son without your help. I don't need you, Do-yun. The only question left is whether Tapiwa deserves a father who's finally willing to show up. Not because it benefits your family's contracts, but because you actually mean it. Some questions are not about romance at all, the narrator reflects. Some are simply about whether a person has become someone worth trusting again. Do-yun was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the skyline that had witnessed every mistake of his life unfold beneath it. I know I don't deserve an easy path back into either of your lives, but I'm asking for the chance to earn it. Not tonight, not through apologies, through time if you'll allow it. Thandiwe studied him carefully, searching his face for the calculation she'd learned to expect from men in his world, and found, to her quiet surprise, something rawer instead. Not the polished confidence of the boss who ruled rooms through fear, but something closer to the man who had once let his guard down for a single night, years ago, before retreating back into the armor his father had built for him. Tapiwa comes first, she said finally. Not your pride, not the syndicate. Not whatever mess you've made with Sarah tonight. If you want a place in his life, you earn it slowly, on his terms. With patience, I'm not sure you've ever practiced in your life. I'll learn, Do-yun said quietly. I have time now. I intend to use it. Inside, the fallout of the evening continued to unravel. Sarah, humiliated and cornered, attempted one final confrontation before leaving the hotel, cornering Do-yun near the elevators as staff quietly cleared the remnants of the gala. You're really choosing them over everything we built? She demanded, her voice sharp with wounded pride. We didn't build anything real, Sarah, Do-yun said, his voice steadier now than it had been all evening. We built an arrangement that looked good on paper. I spent years mistaking that for love because it was easier than facing what I'd actually lost. She left without another word, her heels echoing sharply down the marble corridor, the sound swallowed quickly by the hotel's vast, indifferent silence. Endings rarely announce themselves with drama, the narrator says softly. Most simply arrive the moment someone finally tells the truth out loud. Chairman Han, watching the events of the evening unfold from a distance, approached Thandiwe separately before she departed, his usual arrogance tempered by something closer to respect. I underestimated you, he admitted plainly. That was my mistake, not my son's alone. I hope, for the sake of my grandson, that we can move forward as something resembling family, however unconventional the path that brought us here. That depends entirely on how your family behaves going forward, Thandiwe replied evenly. Tapiwa will grow up knowing his worth isn't defined by contracts or bloodlines convenient to your syndicate. If that's something you can respect, then perhaps there's room for a relationship. If not, I assure you, Chairman, my empire doesn't require your family's approval to thrive. The old man nodded slowly, something like admiration flickering behind his eyes. Understood. In the weeks that followed, Do-yun began the slow, humbling process of rebuilding a relationship with a son who barely knew his face, traveling to Harare not as the head of a feared syndicate, but simply as a man attempting, clumsily and sincerely, to become a father. He learned Tapiwa's favorite stories, sat through afternoons of quiet play, and endured Thandiwe's careful, unwavering supervision of every interaction, earning trust one small moment at a time. Thandiwe, for her part, did not rush toward reconciliation. She allowed herself to watch him change without promising him anything beyond what he had already earned. A place, however small, in his son's life. Love, When it returns, the narrator says gently, rarely returns as it left. It returns changed, cautious, aware of everything it once took for granted. Whether that return would ever expand into something more between Thandui and Do-yun remained for now an open question, one neither of them rushed to answer, content instead to let time reveal what patience and honesty could finally build. Some love stories end in destruction, others end in silence. But the rarest ones end in rebuilding, slow, uncertain, and entirely earned.